People always say cruises are where people go to relax. For me, it became the place where my entire life quietly changed. The funny part is that none of it was supposed to happen. I wasn't looking for romance. Honestly, I almost canceled the trip 2 days before departure. My name's Benjamin. I was 27 at the time, working as a software developer, living alone, and doing the same thing every single day. Wake up, work, gym, Netflix, sleep, repeat. My sister finally got tired of listening to me complain that life felt boring. "You need to get out," she told me over dinner. I go out. "You go to Costco." "That's still outside." She rolled her eyes. "I'm serious. You have vacation time. Use it." A week later, she texted me a link to a 7-day Caribbean cruise that had a huge last-minute discount. At first, I laughed. Cruises weren't really my thing. I pictured retirees playing bingo, endless buffets, and awkward dance classes. Then I saw the price. It was cheaper than staying home for a week. So I booked it. Only after I paid did I realize I'd made one very expensive mistake. I'd accidentally booked a shared cabin. Apparently, the discounted rate meant I'd be paired with another solo traveler. I called customer service immediately. "There are no single cabins left, sir." "So I'm just sharing a room with some random guy?" "Correct." "Can I pay to upgrade?" "Everything is sold out." Fantastic. 7 days. One tiny cabin. One complete stranger. I spent the entire flight convincing myself it wouldn't be that bad. Maybe he'd be older. Maybe we'd barely see each other. Maybe he'd spend all day at the pool while I explored the ship. Easy. The terminal was packed. Families dragging giant suitcases. Couples taking selfies. Kids running everywhere. I checked in, got my key card, and eventually found my deck. Cabin 8427. I took a deep breath before opening the door. The room was smaller than I expected. 2 twin beds, 1 tiny bathroom, a desk, a closet barely big enough for both of us. I claimed the bed closest to the balcony, unpacked my clothes, and figured I'd at least have a few hours before my roommate showed up. Wrong. About 10 minutes later, the door opened. A tall guy stepped inside, carrying a duffel bag over one shoulder. He looked around the room before his eyes landed on me. "Oh." I stood. "Hey." He smiled politely. "You must be Benjamin." I blinked. "You know my name?" "They gave me the cabin assignment during check-in." He held out his hand. "I'm Ryan." I shook it. His grip was firm but relaxed. Up close, he looked around my age, maybe 28 or 29. Dark blonde hair, blue eyes, a light beard that looked like he'd trimmed it that morning. Athletic without looking like he lived in the gym. He was wearing a navy t-shirt, shorts, and sneakers, looking completely comfortable, while I suddenly felt painfully aware that we'd be sharing this tiny space for an entire week. Ryan dropped his bag beside the other bed. "Guess we're roommates?" "I guess so." He laughed. "Could have been worse." "How?" "My last hostel roommate snored like a chainsaw." I smiled despite myself. "Fair." He started unpacking while we made awkward small talk. "Where are you from?" "Chicago? You? Seattle? First cruise?" "Yeah, same." Within 20 minutes, we'd somehow settled into an easy rhythm. Ryan wasn't loud. He wasn't one of those guys who talked just to fill silence. When he spoke, it actually felt like a conversation instead of an interview. "So," he said while hanging a shirt in the closet, "you got dragged here too?" "My sister bullied me into booking it." He laughed. "My co-workers. They all chipped in and bought me cruise credit after I finished this huge project." "So technically, you're here because of peer pressure." "Exactly." "I respect that." The ship's horn echoed through the harbor, vibrating the walls. We stepped onto the balcony together. People on the dock waved toward the ship. Music started playing somewhere below. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, we pulled away from the port. Ryan rested his forearms on the railing. Kinda cool. Yeah. For a minute, neither of us spoke. The city slowly became smaller behind us. Ocean stretched endlessly ahead. I've never actually been on the open ocean before, Ryan admitted. Me neither. He looked over at me. We should probably make one rule. What's that? If one of us gets seasick, the other pretends not to know him? Ryan laughed. Exactly. I can agree to that. The first afternoon passed surprisingly quickly. We explored the ship together mostly because neither of us knew where anything was. We got lost twice, ended up on the wrong deck 3 times, somehow found ourselves inside the spa while looking for the gym. Ryan looked around at people getting massages. I don't think we're supposed to be here. I was wondering why everyone was whispering. We quietly backed out before anyone noticed. By dinner, we'd already fallen into that comfortable rhythm people usually take weeks to find. It felt easy. Too easy. Dinner was open seating, so we grabbed a table together overlooking the ocean. Ryan turned out to be funnier than I expected. Not loud funny. Dry funny. The kind where he'd casually say something with a completely straight face before you realized he was joking. At one point, the waiter asked if everything tasted okay. Ryan nodded seriously. No complaints. The waiter smiled. Wonderful. Ryan waited until he'd walked away. I mean, except the fact that I accidentally ate butter, thinking it was mashed potatoes. I stared at him. You what? He pointed at the tiny white dish. I was distracted. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my fork. You are absolutely not telling anyone that. Oh, I'm taking it to the grave. By the time we finished eating, the sun had started setting. Orange light reflected across the water. The entire ship seemed quieter. We walked the upper deck without really planning to. People leaned against the rails taking pictures. A live band played somewhere near the pool. Ryan slipped his hands into his pockets. I'm glad they paired me with someone normal. I looked over. You were worried? A little. I imagined getting stuck with someone who wanted to party until 4 a.m. I imagined someone who'd spend the whole trip talking politics. Ryan made a face. That would have been worse. Definitely. For some reason, that answer stayed with me. There was something comfortable about walking beside him. No pressure, no awkwardness, just comfortable. I figured we'd spend the week as cruise buddies, maybe exchange numbers afterward. Maybe not. What I didn't know was that less than 24 hours later, one unexpected announcement from the captain would force us much closer than either of us ever expected. The second day started exactly the way I imagined a cruise vacation should. I woke up before Ryan. The curtains were still open from the night before, and sunlight poured through the balcony doors, turning the ocean into an endless sheet of gold. Ryan was still asleep, one arm hanging off the side of his bed, completely oblivious. For a second, I wondered how someone could sleep through the gentle rocking of a ship. Then he snored. Not loudly, just enough to make me grin. So much for judging imaginary chainsaw roommates. I slipped out quietly, grabbed a coffee from the cafe on deck 9, and stood alone at the railing, watching flying fish skim across the water. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about work. It felt nice. When I got back, Ryan was sitting on his bed rubbing his eyes. You disappeared. I figured I'd let you sleep. He stretched. I appreciate that. Coffee? Already had one. He groaned dramatically. Traitor. By mid-morning, we'd somehow become one of those pairs that naturally stayed together. Breakfast, mini-golf, walking around the ship, laughing every time we took a wrong hallway. You realize, Ryan said, looking at the map upside down. We've somehow managed to get lost on something that's literally floating. I think that's impressive. I think we're hopeless. Around lunchtime, we joined a trivia competition, mostly because the host offered free cocktails to the winners. There were 6 teams. We finished 5th. Ryan stared at our answer sheet. Who actually knows the capital of Suriname? The people who beat us. He sighed. We were robbed. You wrote, probably somewhere warm. It was an educated guess. I laughed. I'm never trusting your education. The rest of the afternoon passed in that same relaxed rhythm. We talked more than we had the day before. Real conversations. Ryan worked as a physical therapist, loved hiking, had a younger sister who constantly stole his hoodies. I told him about my job, my terrible cooking skills, and the fact that I'd somehow killed 3 different houseplants, despite buying the easy ones. Cactus? He asked. One of them. He looked genuinely impressed. That's actually difficult. I have a gift. By sunset, we were standing at the very front of the ship. The wind was stronger there, cold enough that people slowly drifted back inside. Ryan leaned against the railing. You know, what? I almost skipped this trip. Really? He nodded. My ex and I were supposed to come together. Oh, we broke up 3 months ago. I looked at him. You don't have to talk about it. It's okay. He shrugged. It just would have felt stupid wasting the cruise. Were you together long? Almost 4 years. I stayed quiet. He smiled faintly. That's usually the part where people say they're sorry. I figured you've probably heard that enough. Ryan looked at me for a second. Yeah. Another silence settled between us. Comfortable, not forced. I've never actually been in a relationship that long, I admitted. No. I shook my head. Work always came first. And now? I watched the ocean. I'm starting to think that was a mistake. Ryan didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. I know that feeling. That conversation stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. It felt honest, like 2 strangers slowly deciding they didn't need to pretend everything was perfect. That night we ended up in one of the ship's lounges, listening to a live pianist. Neither of us was really paying attention to the music. We were talking about childhood vacations, embarrassing school stories, dream destinations. Ryan laughed halfway through telling me about getting lost in Yellowstone when the ship suddenly lurched. Hard. Glasses rattled. A few people grabbed their tables. The music stopped. Everyone looked around. What was that? Someone asked. The captain's voice came over the speakers a few seconds later. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We've encountered an unexpected weather system ahead. There's no cause for concern, but we ask everyone to remain inside while the crew prepares the ship for rougher seas. People exchanged nervous looks. Ryan looked toward one of the windows. Outside, the sky had changed completely. Dark gray clouds covered the horizon. The ocean looked different too. Restless. The wind had picked up dramatically. I guess vacation's getting interesting, he said. Within 30 minutes, the storm hit. Rain slammed against the windows. The ship rocked enough that walking suddenly required concentration. Some passengers laughed. Others looked terrified. Ryan and I made our way back toward our cabin, holding onto railings every few steps. This feels bigger than I expected, I admitted. You and me both. The hallway lights flickered once, then again. People stepped out of their cabins asking questions. Crew members moved quickly through the corridors, reassuring everyone that everything was under control. We had just reached our door when another announcement echoed through the hallway. Attention guests. Due to precautionary safety procedures, all balcony access is temporarily restricted until weather conditions improve. Ryan unlocked the cabin. The second we stepped inside, another powerful wave hit the ship. The floor tilted sharply. I stumbled sideways. Before I could catch myself, Ryan grabbed my arm. "You okay?" "Yeah." His hand stayed there a second longer than necessary. Neither of us seemed to notice until the ship leveled out again. He let go. "Sorry." "No, thanks." Outside, the storm only grew worse. Rain blurred the balcony doors completely. Wind howled loud enough to drown out the television. Neither of us really felt like sleeping. Instead, we sat on opposite beds talking while the ship rocked beneath us. Somehow, the storm made everything quieter inside the room. More personal. Ryan looked toward the ceiling. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why'd your sister really force you onto this cruise?" I smiled. "She said I've been hiding from life." He looked back at me. "Were you?" I thought about answering automatically. Instead, I surprised myself. "Yeah." Ryan nodded slowly. "I think I was too." Before either of us could say anything else, the lights went out. The room dropped into complete darkness. A beat later, emergency lighting flickered on in the hallway outside. Someone down the corridor gasped. Then the captain's voice returned over the speakers. "Attention guests, we've experienced a temporary electrical failure due to the storm. Backup systems are activating. Please remain inside your cabins until further notice." Ryan looked at me in the dim emergency light spilling under the door. "I have a feeling," he said quietly. "This is going to be a much longer night than either of us planned." Neither of us slept much that night. The storm kept throwing the ship from side to side, not enough to make it feel dangerous, but enough that every loud creak made me open my eyes again. Around 2 a.m, another announcement came over the speakers. "Good evening, guests. The worst of the storm has passed. We appreciate your patience. Some onboard activities will remain closed tomorrow morning while the crew completes safety inspections." Ryan let out a long breath. I don't think I've ever been so happy to hear someone's voice. I laughed quietly. I thought cruises were supposed to be relaxing. So did I. Eventually, the rocking became gentler, and somewhere before sunrise, I finally fell asleep. The next morning, the ocean looked completely different. Calm, blue, like the storm had never happened. I stepped onto the balcony while Ryan was still getting dressed. Fresh air filled the cabin. A few dolphins surfaced in the distance before disappearing beneath the waves again. "You know," Ryan said behind me, "if someone showed me this right now, I'd never believe last night happened." I was thinking the same thing. After breakfast, we wandered around the ship. Several lounges were still closed while crew members cleaned up overturned furniture and replaced broken decorations. Passengers were everywhere, sharing exaggerated versions of the storm. I heard someone say they thought the ship was sinking. Ryan whispered. I also heard someone claim they slept through the whole thing. He shook his head. I want whatever they took. We laughed and kept walking. By late morning, most activities had reopened. The pool deck was crowded again. Music played through the speakers. It felt like everyone wanted to pretend the rough night had never happened. Ryan looked toward the rock climbing wall. Want to try it? You just want to watch me embarrass myself. I absolutely do. You could have at least lied. He grinned. I don't like starting friendships with dishonesty. Friendships. The word shouldn't have made me smile as much as it did. I made it about halfway up the climbing wall before my arms completely gave out. Ryan was laughing so hard he nearly dropped his phone. You are never seeing those pictures. Oh, I'm keeping them forever. I hate you? No, you don't. I climbed back down, pretending to be offended. He handed me a bottle of water. You actually did better than I expected. That's somehow not a compliment. It wasn't. I shoved his shoulder lightly. He bumped mine back. Neither of us thought anything of it. At least, I don't think we did. That afternoon, we found a quiet observation lounge near the front of the ship. Almost nobody was there. Just a few people reading books while the ocean stretched endlessly outside the giant windows. Ryan sat across from me with 2 coffees. So? I've been trying to figure something out. That sounds dangerous. He ignored me. How is someone who works in software so bad with technology? I frowned. What? You couldn't figure out the cruise app. It was confusing. You scanned your room key upside down. That happened once? It happened 3 times. I sighed dramatically. I trusted you. You shouldn't. He laughed. The conversation drifted from one topic to another. Favorite movies, terrible first jobs, music we'd listened to growing up. Hours disappeared without either of us noticing. At one point, Ryan became unusually quiet. He stared out at the water before speaking. Can I admit something? Sure. I was nervous about sharing a cabin. I was too. No, he shook his head. I mean, really nervous. I waited. My breakup kind of messed with me. He looked down at his coffee. When you spend years planning your future with someone, you forget how to meet new people. I nodded slowly. I get that. I almost asked for a different cabin. That surprised me. You did? I thought it'd be awkward. He smiled. I'm glad I didn't. Something warm settled in my chest. Me too. Our eyes met for a second. Neither of us looked away immediately. The moment wasn't dramatic, just different. Then someone walked past us, breaking whatever silence had settled between us. Ryan cleared his throat. So? You hungry? I was starting to think you'd never ask. That evening, the ship hosted a formal dinner. I almost skipped it. Ryan wouldn't let me. You packed one nice shirt. My sister packed one nice shirt. Same difference. An hour later, we were sitting in the main dining room overlooking the ocean. Ryan actually cleaned up incredibly well. The casual t-shirts were gone, replaced by a fitted navy button-up that somehow made his blue eyes stand out even more. He caught me looking. What? Nothing. You hesitated? I was just thinking. He raised an eyebrow. You look different. He smiled. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. And you don't look like you spend all day staring at computer screens. I definitely do. Damn. I laughed. Dinner lasted almost 2 hours. By the end of it, neither of us wanted to go back to the cabin yet. The upper deck was nearly empty. Most people were inside watching one of the theater shows. Outside, the night air was cool. The stars were unbelievably bright. Without city lights, the sky looked endless. Ryan leaned against the railing. I've never seen this many stars. I looked up. It almost doesn't feel real. The ship moved quietly through the dark water. No music, no crowds, just waves. Ryan rested his elbows on the rail beside me. You know what's weird? What? It feels like we've known each other longer than 3 days. I smiled. I was thinking that earlier. Usually I get tired of people after about 48 hours. So this is a compliment? A surprisingly big one. I laughed. So what happens after the cruise? The question caught me off guard. I don't know. You go back to Seattle. You go back to Chicago. He nodded. Life goes back to normal. For some reason, neither of us sounded very excited about that idea. We stood there in silence for another minute. Not awkward, just thinking. Then the ship gave a gentle roll beneath our feet. Instinctively, I reached for the railing. At the exact same moment, Ryan reached out to steady himself. Instead of grabbing the rail, his hand landed over mine. We both froze. Neither of us pulled away immediately. The only sound was the ocean moving beneath the ship. Ryan looked down at our hands, then back at me. I'm sorry. It's okay. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he let go. Neither of us spoke for the rest of the walk back to the cabin. But as I climbed into bed that night, I couldn't stop thinking about one simple fact. When Ryan touched my hand, for just a second, it hadn't felt accidental anymore. The next morning felt different. Nothing obvious had changed. The ocean was calm again. The ship was running on schedule. Passengers filled the buffet like nothing unusual had happened. And yet, something between Ryan and me had shifted. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed it. When I walked into the cabin bathroom, he smiled. Morning. Morning. Neither of us mentioned what had happened on the deck the night before. The accidental hand touch, the silence afterward. It was easier to pretend it hadn't mattered. Except, I wasn't sure either of us believed that. Our final full day began with a stop at one of the islands. White sand, crystal clear water, palm trees that looked almost fake. Ryan rented snorkeling gear. I admitted I'd never tried it before. Seriously? I grew up in Seattle. He laughed. Fair point. An hour later, I was floating beside him above a coral reef. Schools of colorful fish darted beneath us. Sea turtles drifted lazily through the water. When I finally surfaced, pulling off my mask, I couldn't stop smiling. Okay, I admitted. That was incredible. Ryan grinned. Told you. I officially owe you one. You do? We spent most of the afternoon wandering through the small island town. Tiny cafes, souvenir shops, street musicians. Ryan insisted on buying us coconut ice cream from a little stand near the beach. This is either going to be amazing or terrible, I finished. He handed me a spoon. It can be both. One bite later, I looked at him. I hate admitting you're right. I know. It really is good. I know. You seem very confident today. I usually am. I rolled my eyes. That's your biggest flaw. I've been told. Later we found a quiet stretch of beach away from the crowds. Neither of us seemed interested in rushing back to the ship. Ryan skipped a shell across the shallow water. It bounced 3 times. I tried. Mine sank immediately. I think physics dislikes you, he said. I think you're showing off. I absolutely am. I laughed. You know. He looked toward the horizon. I haven't laughed this much in a long time. The comment surprised me. I was just thinking the same thing. He smiled without looking at me. I almost didn't come on this trip. I'm glad you did. His smile grew slightly. So am I. That evening, the ship left the island just before sunset. People lined the rails, waving goodbye. Ryan and I stood near the back, watching the shoreline slowly disappear. I don't really want this week to end, I admitted. He was quiet for a moment. Me neither. Neither of us said anything after that, because saying more would have made it real. That night there was one final deck party. Music, lights, people dancing under the stars. Normally, I would have stayed far away from something like that. Ryan nudged my shoulder. Come on. I don't dance. Neither do I. So why are we here? He smiled. Because it's our last night. I couldn't really argue with that. We found a quieter spot near the edge of the deck where the music wasn't as loud. Couples danced nearby. Friends laughed over drinks. The ocean stretched endlessly around us. Ryan rested his arms on the railing. Can I ask you something? You've asked me a lot of things this week. And you've answered every one. Fair. He looked at me. When you booked this cruise. Yeah? Did you expect to leave with a friend? I smiled. No. Me neither. There it was again. That word. Friend. It sounded right. And somehow, incomplete. A slow song replaced the upbeat music. Several couples drifted toward the dance floor. Ryan watched them for a second before shaking his head. I always thought this stuff was cheesy. And now? I'm starting to understand it. I laughed softly. You've become sentimental. Don't tell anyone. Your secret's safe. He looked at me for a long second. I'm serious. So am I. The wind picked up gently around us. Neither of us moved. Neither of us seemed to notice how close we'd been standing. You know what scares me? Ryan asked quietly. What? Going home. I frowned. Why? Because I'm afraid this... He looked around the ship. Stays here. The words landed harder than I expected. I've been thinking about that too. You have? I nodded. I don't want to pretend this week never happened. Ryan let out a slow breath. I'm glad. So? So? We don't have to. His eyes searched mine. You mean that? I do. For the first time all week, neither of us smiled, because suddenly this conversation wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was real. Ryan stepped a little closer, close enough that I could see the tiny freckles across the bridge of his nose. I've been trying to figure something out since yesterday. What? I don't think you're just someone I happen to share a cabin with anymore. My heart was pounding so loudly, I wondered if he could hear it. I don't think you are either. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The music continued behind us. The waves rolled quietly against the ship. Ryan reached out slowly. Not suddenly, not impulsively, just carefully. His fingers brushed mine. This time, neither of us pulled away. We stood there with our hands resting together on the railing. Simple, natural, comfortable. Ryan smiled. I was hoping you'd do that. I laughed quietly. I was waiting for you. He shook his head. We've wasted a lot of time this week. Only 6 days. Still. The announcement for the midnight fireworks echoed across the deck. Passengers cheered. Bright colors exploded above the ocean. Everyone looked toward the sky. Everyone, except us. Because for the first time since we'd boarded the ship, neither of us was looking at the view anymore. The fireworks ended a few minutes later. Everyone applauded. People hugged, laughed, and slowly wandered back inside. Ryan and I stayed where we were. Our hands were still resting together on the railing. Neither of us seemed in a hurry to move. Finally, Ryan let out a quiet laugh. I don't think this week went the way either of us expected. I smiled. Not even close. He looked out across the dark ocean. I keep trying to figure out when everything changed. I don't think it was one moment. No? I shook my head. I think it happened a little at a time. The terrible trivia team. The climbing wall. The storm. The butter. He groaned. I told you we were taking that to the grave. I'll remind you of it when we're 80. He laughed, nudging my shoulder. For some reason, that tiny gesture felt more intimate than anything else that had happened all week. The next morning came much too quickly. Suitcases rolled through the hallways. People hurried to finish breakfast before disembarkation. The cruise that had once felt endless suddenly seemed far too short. Ryan folded the last of his clothes into his duffel bag. I hate packing. I think everyone does. It makes everything feel official. I nodded. Neither of us said much after that. The room looked strangely empty without our clothes scattered around. Just 2 neatly made beds, exactly the way we'd found them 7 days earlier. Except now it didn't feel like a stranger's cabin anymore. It felt like ours. Ryan looked around one last time. You know, what? I was worried about sharing this room. I remember. I think I'll actually miss it. I smiled. So will I. The line to leave the ship moved slowly. Passengers exchanged phone numbers. Crew members waved goodbye. The city skyline grew larger with every step down the gangway. Ryan stood beside me, unusually quiet. I guess this is where normal people say goodbye. I've never been very good at goodbyes. He rubbed the back of his neck. Me neither. For a second, we simply stood there while people walked around us. Then Ryan reached into his pocket. I already put my number in your phone? I blinked. You what? You left it charging while you showered this morning. I stared at him. That's incredibly invasive. I also changed your wallpaper. I pulled out my phone. The background was now a blurry picture of me, halfway up the climbing wall, wearing an expression of complete panic. I looked up. You are the worst. I'm hilarious. I laughed so hard people turned to look at us. Okay, I admitted. That was a good one. You'll think of me every time you unlock your phone. I was already going to. The joke faded. Neither of us looked away. Ryan smiled softly. Call me when you get home. I will. And don't wait 3 weeks pretending you're busy. I won't? You promise? I promise. Without really thinking about it, I stepped forward and hugged him. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't hesitant. It simply felt right. After a second, he hugged me back just as tightly. When we pulled apart, he smiled. I had a feeling this cruise would be memorable. I just didn't expect the reason. Neither did I. Seattle felt exactly the same. Gray skies, traffic, coffee shops on every corner. But something inside me had changed. The apartment felt quieter than I remembered. The routine that had once felt comfortable now felt empty. 2 days later, my phone rang. Ryan. I answered before the second ring. Hey, you picked up fast. I was pretending not to stare at my phone. He laughed. I figured. We talked for nearly 3 hours. About work, about unpacking, about how strange it felt not hearing the ocean anymore. Those calls became part of our routine. 3 nights a week. Then almost every night. Sometimes we talked for 5 minutes. Sometimes until one of us accidentally fell asleep on the phone. 3 weeks later, Ryan texted me. Ryan. Random question. Me. Those are usually dangerous. Ryan. Chicago has good pizza. Me. That's not a question. Ryan. Come verify it. I stared at the message for a full minute before smiling. Me. You're paying for dessert. Ryan. Deal. Walking through the arrivals gate at O'Hare felt strangely familiar. Ryan was waiting near baggage claim, hands in his pockets. The same relaxed smile I'd first seen when he walked into cabin 8427. The moment he spotted me, he walked over. No shared cabin this time. I laughed. No storm either. Kind of disappointing. I think we've had enough excitement. For a second, we simply looked at each other. Then Ryan smiled. I missed you. The words were simple, honest, exactly what I had been feeling. I missed you too. He stepped closer. So? I've been thinking. That's usually dangerous. It is. He smiled. I don't want this to just be a cruise story we tell people years from now. I felt my heart speed up. I don't either. You know what the nice thing about planes is? What? They work both directions. I laughed. So do phones. He looked at me hopefully. Maybe we stop treating Chicago and Seattle like they're impossible. I nodded. I'd like that. No. He corrected himself with a grin. I'd really like that. So would I. He held out his hand. Not dramatically, just naturally. The same way he had on the first day. I took it without hesitation. Funny how 7 days in a tiny cruise cabin with a complete stranger had turned into something neither of us had been looking for. I boarded that ship expecting nothing more than a cheap vacation. Instead, I came home with someone who made home feel a little less lonely. Sometimes the best journeys don't end when you leave the ship. Sometimes they're only just beginning.